In our day, you sat to attention, you thought to attention, you wrote down notes off the blackboard. Learning by numbers, I suppose.
Right, one line of boys. Out at the back, please.
The first thing that struck me this morning was in the assembly, the attitude of the staff to the children. They don't talk at them, they talk to them. Whereas when we had assembly, almost you couldn't breathe or speak, everything was regimented. You sort of marched in the morning, you marched out, sang two hymns, a few prayers. You couldn't blow your nose.
I can remember when we used to have assembly, all the teachers used to go on stage, and it was a case of them and us. Quite a lot of people used to faint in assembly as well.
Yeah, but you used to do it very quietly too.
The 1960s. Ian Seville, John Richardson, John Davis, Craig Fleming and Alison May were pupils at Haslingden Grammar School in Bury Road. Maria Monaghan, Linda Stevenson, Brian Till and Eve Ogden were at the secondary modern in the town. Two tribes separated only by a few streets and their 11+ results.
I think I arrived at school about 8:15 and we were not allowed in. You could freeze to death on the doorstep, but you weren't allowed in. But one of the old building doors was so well used, the stone had been worn away, being like small-handed. I used to try and lift this coach bolt up from underneath to try and unlock the door and park yourself near the radiator to bring your body temperature up to something like normal. And a certain prefect used to take great delight in stamping all over my fingers, and I'll never forgive him for that.
I had my head flushed out of the loo the first day at school, and that was perfectly to be expected. It was something that most boy pupils went through. Two guys just came towards me, and you thought, oh, well, I'll just go through with it. So your head just went down, pull the chain, and then you're away. You just ran away. That was it. I think it was the fourth year who did it. It was a ritual that you all went through.
Once you got to the fourth year, you were the ones doing the flushing.
White chalk written on red brick, our love told in a heart. It's there, drawn in the playground, love kiss, hate or adore.
Playtime used to be spent standing in the playground in like little gangs. Everybody had their own little gang, and you just stand there and talk about a particular topic of that week, or which particular boy you fancied and how you were going to get their attention and things like that. Being attached to a particular group, that meant a lot. I think you got that sense of security if you belonged.
The only thing you used to think about was football. And at the time, there was intense rivalry in this area with Blackburn Rovers, Burnley, and you usually found that half the school was one or the other. It just sort of dominated everything. You lived for football all the time, either playing, watching. And summer just was an interruption to the football season, really. It was just an inconvenience.
I remember the girls' and boys' playground being very, very strictly tied apart. There was a line of stones in the middle of the yard. Oh, my God, you daren't cross that line. It was like a monk being found in a nunnery or something. It was a sin of sins to cross that line of stones. One of Mr. Weston's eyeballs would suddenly descend on you.
I can remember it being quite an exciting time in retrospect. When you think that when I was at school, in probably the third or fourth year, it was the emergence of the Beatles era. It was all so new, and the music was just something that nobody had ever heard of before. And it was like an exciting time, really, when you think about it.
I remember a dinner time club that we held, 12:30 to 1. You paid a penny and they played records. And that was very civilised, wasn't it, when you think about it now. We had a youth club too, because we used to have snooker, didn't we? And darts and table tennis. The rest of the hall was for you dancing again. It was more boy-girl dancing, it wasn't groups. Like they dance girls together now in a ring, like the Ring of Confidence. It had to be with a male. It was quite exciting, wasn't it? Who was going to come and ask you to dance? And the lads did come and ask you to dance. Especially if you were like in the first year and the third year or fourth year came and asked you to dance. I mean, you thought you were the bee's knees.
Everybody used to pair off with somebody else, and it was all changed the next week. And more used to go on at Bury Road than I ever did at Dallas.
We used to say, look at them snugging there, they'd be really going at it up the corner there, providing the teacher didn't see them. Oh yeah, we used to stand there and watch them. I remember one, he was called Martin, I can't remember his last name, and I always fancied him. I used to think, oh, just look at them. But I think it was a very romantic time. I think more than what it is now. I don't see them.
Maybe
like
we're
we
not
used to
looking
do.
now.
No, maybe we're not. We're not looking in the right places.
The friends and the lads I knew never had any interest in girls, really. They were just an inconvenience at the school. Children these days seem to mature a lot younger now, and they're more aware of, the opposite sex. You can tell that the way they dress. I mean, we never bothered about fashion. Not until you were sort of 15, 16 did you even become conscious of clothes.
The craze was short white socks with your nylons on underneath. But it's if you could get the right colour that you wouldn't be spotted. The teacher would come up and pluck your knee to see if you had stockings on, because you weren't really allowed, but it made your legs look a lot nicer.
Can you remember skirts as well, when the sort of miniskirt was coming in? Yeah. And we had to wear our skirts, so many inches above the knee and no higher. That's and the girls sort of turning over the tops, to make the skirt shorter.
The mods and the rockers. That was the great thing in those days. And the school conveniently, as far as the boys are concerned, divided themselves up into the two. You always got the guys that used to dress up in the crepes, all brothel creepers, you walk 3 paces before your shoes would move, and tight grey trousers that needed to be sewn on around your legs, long curly hair. And there was the other brigade who they used to wear button-down collars and turn the ties back to front, so the narrow end was to the front, and DA hairstyles. No, I certainly wasn't a rocker, and I didn't like motorbikes, and still don't like motorbikes. I think I was more of a mod than anything else.
I was certainly a mod. I had a scooter at one time. Yeah, and I think that up to about the 3rd year or the 4th year, I was frightened of some of the boys who were in the 5th and the 6th. There did seem to be some pretty hard boys at the school in those years, and that would be 63 on to 66.
But looking back now, in retrospect, they possibly weren't as hard as what you gave them credit for being in your youth.
Some of those guys were hard. They were.
The winkle picker shoes.
Yeah.
Suddenly you'd see a gang of children all running to one point, and there was two lads usually, sort of tearing hell out of each other. And then the teacher would come along, the one that was on playground duty or whatever, and they'd break up. Yeah.
If it was a planned fight, the arrangements would be done quite early. You'd have watch-outs. As soon as there's any teachers around, the signals would go up, and there'd be distractions and things like that going on. It was quite organised at times. And the whole school would be involved. It'd be passed word of mouth from classroom to classroom during the break time. And they'd all know where it was going to go off. Yeah.
But it was invariably behind the bus, wasn't it? Yeah. Because it sort of sank down into like an arena at the bottom, and all the children stood over the top and watched the fight in the bottom.
That's where it all used to take place, out of the view of the teacher.
I used to have quite a bit to do with the secondary modern school kids because we travelled on the same bus, and there was almost a segregation there that they went downstairs and we went upstairs. And the 8:20 and the 8:30 buses tend to be the grammar school kids' bus, but would be tired if you missed it and you got on the other bus. Well, you'd wait. You'd come to school late, in fact, rather than risk it.
They'd nick your cap.
No, they'd nick your cap. Yeah, they probably take your satchel and they probably sort of flick ink on your books,
Chalk on your back.
Yeah, chalk on the back. That's right. Yeah,
the blazers. It wouldn't come off the old blazers.
A bit like Christians to the Lions.
There was never any feeling of inferiority about going to secondary school. None at all. I found when I was left the primary school that most of my own personal friends went with me. The ones that sort of passed their 11 plus and went to the grammar school, I think you've basically severed, your relationship with them.
I think at that time in the 60s, having a child selected for grammar school was a way of guaranteeing that your child was going to make the great step between working class and middle class. And therefore, in a way, for parents, it was a reassurance for their child's future.
I felt terribly disappointed. I failed my 11 plus and I thought, I must be thick. There was a sense of failure there. And I think as well, it made me think, well, I'm going to show them. I'm not thick. And it gave me that bit of sort of fighting spirit, perhaps, I don't know.
We didn't really play a lot against the grammar school. It was the other secondary modern schools that we played against. I mean, I remember going to the changing rooms to get changed for one particular match, and they locked me in the toilet because I was a goal shooter. I was absolutely fuming. Yeah, but they wouldn't let me out of this toilet, and I missed the match.
We always seem to be on the move, going to this or that or whatever. Do you remember going down to the woodwork shop in that old chapel when we were in the old school? Every Monday afternoon, 10 minutes there, 10 minutes back. On a Friday afternoon, waiting for the bus to come down to the game school that would always arrive 10 minutes late to bring us to our lesson and would arrive 5 minutes earlier to take us back to school so that we catch other buses.
And walking to the swimming baths. There was one maths teacher who used to take us to the swimming baths, and he wasn't too familiar with the layout of the streets in the town, and he depended on us to guide him. And we used to walk him about 5 miles around the town before we'd arrive at the swimming baths. He was convinced the baths were miles away, and they were only about 300 yards away from the school.
I remember my friend and myself being conned into swimming in the school gala. But we weren't really the swimming type, not serious swimmers, and we both turned up in bikinis.
Yeah, I remember one year being in a gala and being in quite a few events and running out of swimming costumes. My mum said, "Oh, use mine." So I got my mum's costume. Well, of course, it was a padded top. And I dived in to do this relay. And I remember taking off across this bed because, the pads just filled up with air. And it was like having a swim float there. And I zoomed up the boat to win this here event. And sort of shot out of the water and ran back to the changing rooms because I felt so ridiculous, so hideous, with these two big cups stood there full of fresh air.
School camp. That was our big event of the year, and we'd go down to either the West Country or to South Wales, North Wales.
I can remember travelling down to Harlech with the advance party. We stopped at traffic lights in some little Welsh town and we'd all got our faces pressed to the windows. So it must have looked as if we were being taken to an institution. Let me out.
We used to do that deliberately. Yeah, that's right, I remember that.
Discipline was still fairly strong on the camp, but I think if you were caught anywhere near the girls' tents after a certain time, then you'd be emptying the latrines for the next 3 days. Anything more sinister and you'd be off home. But I can't remember anybody actually being sent home, but they cleaned the latrines out.
Going abroad, which is taken quite as the norm these days, kids are going all over the world, but our first trip abroad was a cruise, a school cruise. I remember about 64, 65, which was terribly adventurous in those days, made all the national newspapers and everything, and the maths teacher that organised it just married the school secretary. They used that trip as their honeymoon, so they must be the only two in the world that ever took 24 kids on the honeymoon with them. And it was such a big adventure going across the Bay of Biscay. And he was too busy being seasick. I think that's what it was. He never came out of his cabin much.
It was such a small school that the type of discipline we had was that you were letting yourself down and the pupils you were with and the staff down if you did anything wrong. And so very, very few people, given that responsibility, very few people did, as far as I recollect, stray out of line, really.
Some teachers had a pump
with a star on.
Yeah.
That's right.
Chalk a star on the bottom of the pump, bend you over and smack you with it, and it left an imprint on the bottom.
Well, that was preferable, really, than having to stay behind after school, because after school activities is always something to do after school, wasn't it? 8 of detention. Nobody like that.
There were two particular teachers that we were cruel to, but I think that's because we realised they were hopeless teachers.
We were more unkind to the ones that we didn't feel were very good at their jobs, perhaps. We could pick it up, we knew, and you'd play on it.
There was one maths teacher who used to walk around with a pump in his pocket, and he would take you out of the classroom and would gladly give you 6 of the best if you deserved it. He also used to wear a brown smock that we used to splatter with ink as he walked up and down the classroom. I think the lovely thing I found today was when we walked into the classroom, it took me back 20 years that as a visitor, the class stopped and stood up. And there was still that mark of dignity and discipline there, but it didn't seem to affect the family feeling within the classroom. If we're saying that discipline has fallen in schools in the last 20 years, I think they were more disciplined this morning than we were in our day.
When we were at school, there was only one member of staff used to call his class by the Christian names, and now it seems to be the norm. It was all Seville this and Richardson the other, and now it's John or Ian.
Nouns. We discovered last Friday that there were 4 types of nouns, didn't we? Common nouns. What are those?
Normal ones.
Normal ones. Naming words. Names of what kinds of things? Can somebody give me an example of a common noun? Table. Blackboard. Chair.
It was very difficult this morning, the English lesson, I felt. And I remember feeling exactly the same as I did way back at school when, the teacher's sort of going on and he's ready for asking a question. And I felt that feeling. I don't know what the answer is, so my head sort of went really down. No eye contact or anything. I hope he doesn't ask me. Just not being able to answer a question and, feeling really thick.
Abstract nouns, what are those?
Miss, places like...
No, not places.
Is it a group of people?
No, not a group of people.
Is it something like feel and taste, that you can't, see or
Things
touch?
that you can't see or touch. Like...
Fear.
Fear, yes.
No. Happiness.
Happiness, yes.
Hate.
Hate. Proper nouns. What are those?
Miss, names of actual places and people.
Yes, hooray, Christopher. Names of actual places.
It was nice to see a mixing of the boys and girls as well. We went in a technical drawing class and there was girls there quite happy with a set square and T-square or whatever you call them. We went through the needlework class and there were a couple of guys sat behind a sewing machine, learning to sew buttons on and things like that. I've noticed a room full of typewriters down there. The only typewriter in the old school was in the secretary's office. You never did any sort of training for life, any skills training, skills development. I noticed in the prospectus Mr. Marshall sent us there was something about car mechanics. I am a total, absolute waste of time when it comes to do-it-yourself. My idea of do-it-yourself is finding the yellow pages on my own. And I'm convinced that this goes back to a lack of development of skills training at school.
In some ways it was easier for us, although we had a very heavy workload, compared with the number of options and choices now that the third year seemed to have to make. We all did the same O-levels, I think.
And the choice at A-level was you either did maths, physics and chemistry, or you did geography, history, economics and English, 3 out of those 4.
Well, it had improved slightly by the time I reached the sixth form, because we got biology then into the syllabus when we moved down to this new school.
In 1967, the grammar school pupils moved from the familiar old building in Bury Road to a brand new campus built on their sports field on the edge of town, the site of the present-day high school.
I moved down here in the third year. I had the first 2 in the old building. And it was comfortable. It was... You did feel a sense of history there. My mother had been to the same school there, and I think you felt reassured, maybe. And I didn't like modern buildings. It looked like a factory. You didn't realise that it would be the same people somehow. It was a new building and you didn't feel as happy.
I sat here the first day and thought, my God, isn't it big? I'm going to need a map to find my way around this place. Because it just seems so vast and huge compared to the tininess of the Bury Road School, which really was just a big house.
For me, it was like moving from winter into spring. Winter with its blackness and its dark brown paint and its 3 floors and its marble corridors and, the headmaster standing at the bottom of the stairs making sure you were walking in an orderly way up the stairs. And comparing that with the spring and the new life and the light and, well, almost the daffodils budding out. And it was a great sense of fun that here was something new. We actually moved into this new building as sixth formers. And we had our own common room and our own study area that was very much ours.
That was the feeling I remember of the new building, feeling terribly sophisticated and grown up. A student, if you like, in a common room and
coffee
being unregimented.
When we moved here, we had a new headmaster. That for me was quite a new era. I remember the first time he walked into a history lesson and he started lecturing us rather than telling us what to do. And about after 20 minutes we realised, well, we've not made any notes on this because all the other teachers dictated notes to us, and it was a completely new way of learning.
I think it was automatically expected of you. If you got as far as the sixth form, you went on somewhere else, be it university or a college of education. It was just a matter of which, and getting your grades ultimately.
O-levels and A-levels were always during the half-term holiday week, and we were allowed to suck polo mints, which was a concession to keep us going. I can remember it was always hot weather.
And I remember at the end of the A-level exams stacking all my history, geography, economics textbooks, each about an inch thick. And they were damn near taller than I was. It was a hell of an amount to learn, wasn't there?
I just remember a lot of work and very frayed nerves. I think not to let your parents down, in a way. They worked extremely hard, for me to go to grammar school and keep me at grammar school. They wanted me to go to university.
Yes, I was very conscious that I was having opportunities in education which my parents hadn't had. And I think being an only child, I felt I wanted to do the best for them as well as for myself.
No, I didn't like school. In actual fact, I left before I took any exams. I left after the end of the fourth year, basically because I felt I didn't think I was going to be capable to pass them at that time. And employment in them days was far easier to come by. And I sort of got myself a job during the summer term and left. I went on day release to college, and I found the education there. I got more out of the education I got at college in the years after than I ever felt I did at school. But I couldn't wait to leave school. I didn't like it at all.
I think coming back today, 19 years after leaving, I'm even more proud of the school. A sense of history, a sense of belonging, a sense that here were happy days. Lots of memories have come to the fore today. I mean, for example, when we were sitting down at lunchtime, I had exactly the same lunch that I had on my first day at school. Chips, Buster peas and steak and kidney pie, and custard and Manchester tart. The only difference was then I was sent home in the afternoon because I was violently sick.
Looking at the third line, starting off with four Ds there, crotchet Ds, then we've got 3 patterns exactly the same. Introduction again, ready?
I remember the music teacher, when we were having a singing practice, she'd single certain boys especially out to the front and would make them do the scale, and if they were out of key she'd clip their ear roll and told them to go back and be quiet.
Learning for sort of weeks on end prior to the speech night, the 2 school hymns of Out to Thee My Country and Jerusalem, and it had to be absolutely word perfect on the night.
You can never hear that hymn without thinking of the school.
Can't help joining in if I do hear it.
I must say, when I sing it at a funeral or I sing it in church on Remembrance Sunday, it actually does bring back those tears and those memories, particularly that line, amongst those dark satanic mills. I really do feel homesick at that point wherever I am.
One evening at one of these speech nights, playing in the orchestra, playing the violin, I was up in the corner by, just underneath the stage, and Paul was at the ready to set off playing our tune, and my bow wouldn't come down. It had got stuck with the geranium plants, and I pulled and tugged petals. I just could not get it out of the geranium plant. I mean, it did come out eventually. But every time, you went up with your bow again, I couldn't go as far as everybody else and met them coming back down again on my bow. And then the music teacher getting carried away and falling off his box just to cap it all. It was really hilarious night, was that.
Nobody would tell a joke for 3 weeks before speech day. You'd write them all down on little pieces of paper. And then when you were there on the night, you'd pass these little jokes up and down, backwards and forwards, left and right, for about 2 hours. I always think of myself as being a lad from the valley. You know, it's the best valley this side of the Rhondda. I mean, I left Rosendale when I left the school. I went to university, then I was here, there and everywhere until I eventually settled down where I am now, near Liverpool. But I'm always a valley lad. Even though I very rarely come home, even. Very rarely. Everything I did and went on to do in my adult life, the foundations were laid here. It's never something you can leave behind. It's the basis of your whole life.
One of the most heartening things that I found about today is that whether you call it a grammar school, secondary modern or comprehensive, it is the same school. It's still the same thing that I experienced.
This school is the same family.
I agree.
It's continuing what we had the benefit of 20 years ago.
I agree.
And it would be fascinating to come back in another 20 years to see if the next generations were continuing those traditions and those same feelings.